Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to Brookline Booksmith. My name is Bonnie, and I'm the Assistant Events Director and a bookseller here at the store. Before we begin, I just have a few boring housekeeping notes. Firstly, please keep your phones off or on silent for the duration of the event. And thank you for making the event more enjoyable for everyone. It's okay, I do the same thing. Secondly, if you haven't yet picked up your pre-ordered book or you would like to purchase a copy of the book, you can do so at the back counter over there. Please note also that this event is being live streamed on that iPad. Hello to anyone watching. Our audience is not viewable to our live stream viewers, but if you don't want to be live on YouTube, just don't walk in front of it and you'll be fine. And finally, we will of course have a Q&A toward the end of the event. So please hold all your questions until then, but definitely have them ready. And now for the fun part. It is my pleasure to introduce our authors and tell you a bit about the wonderful book we're here to celebrate. Our conversation partner tonight is Kit Mayquist. A fan of everything spooky and indulgent, Kit is a bisexual transmasculine writer who can be found in the historic shadows of Boston, Mass. Hunched over his desk with a sullen Persian cat in his lap and surrounded in antiques. He has a master's degree in medieval history from the University of Iceland and a bachelor's from Portland State University. And if you ask him, yes, of course, Stumptown will always have the best coffee. He is, of course, what was it?
Sorry, Duncan.
Yeah. Even Duncan knows they don't have the best. He's the author of Tripping Arcadia, which is, of course, a favorite book here at the store. It's sort of a cross between The Great Gatsby and Mexican Gothic, and it's set here in Boston, which we love. We love a local interest book. We were lucky enough to host an event for the book's release back in February. Yeah. When it came out. So, Kit, it's great to have you back, and it's great to have you back too. Saint was the conversation partner at that event.
Switched.
Exactly.
Yeah, the old switcheroo. Yeah. So now to introduce Saint. Saint is an author, literary agent, and village wise woman in training. She holds a bachelor's degree in creative writing from UNC Asheville and a master's degree in theological studies from Princeton Theological Seminary. She's the author of the books Dowry of Blood, Odd Spirits, and Robber Girl. Her essays and short fiction have appeared in Mithridate magazine? Mithridate. Magazine, and she has stories featured in the folk horror anthology, The Fiends in the Furrows, and the queer gothic anthology, Unspeakable. She currently lives in Boston with her fiance, spoilers, it's Kit, spoiled Persian cat, the same cat that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and vintage blazer collection. We're so thrilled to have her here to celebrate A Dowry of Blood, which is a re-release of a previously published novel and a well-loved book here at the store. We've been so thrilled to carry A Dowry of Blood as a sort of stalwart item in our horror section, but we've been missing it since we ran out of stock for a little while waiting for this new edition to come out. So now it is finally here. The day has come, and we're so excited to celebrate it. To tell you a little bit about the book, A Dowry of Blood is a nightmarish horror romance that retells the tale of Dracula from the perspective of one of his consorts. Saved from the brink of death by a mysterious stranger, Constanta is transformed from a medieval peasant into a bride fit for an undying king. But when Dracula draws a cunning aristocrat and a starving artist into his web of passion and deceit, Constanta realizes that her beloved is capable of terrible things. Finding comfort in the arms of her rival consorts, she begins to unravel her husband's dark secrets. With the lives of everyone she loves on the line, she will have to choose between her own freedom and her love for her husband. The book has been lauded by critics as lyrical, intoxicating, sumptuous was one of my favorite descriptor words that I found. The list goes on. Hannah Witten called it a dizzying nightmare of a romance that will leave you aching, angry, and ultimately hopeful. We're so excited to hear you talk about it. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Saint and Kit.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it out tonight.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. So, Saint.
Hey, Kit.
Hi.
How you doing?
Well, I wanted to start out with, it is October,
Yes.
as you know. It is spooky season.
Yes.
It also happens to be an excellent week for a vampire book release. Do you know what all has happened this week?
I know yesterday was Anne Rice's birthday, which is thrilling. Yeah, pour one out. And I didn't know until the day of my launch that the launch was on Anne Rice's birthday. And then I lost it, and I contacted my editor and I was like, "Did you know?" And no one knew. It was a total accident.
Do you know what today is?
I do not know what today is.
All right, well, I am unfortunately obligated to tell you this.
Okay.
As someone from the Pacific Northwest,
Okay.
on this day, 2005, Twilight was released. So congratulations.
I'm thrilled.
You're joining.
All the stars are aligning.
Yeah, joining the
Everything
race.
is right.
Just the perfect week for a vampire book release. Or re-release.
Yeah, re-release, exactly.
A rebirth. Fitting.
A rebirth.
Fitting for a vampire.
Precisely.
Yeah. So considering the week and that it is so clearly perfect for vampires, I just wanted to ask you and kind of start off this conversation with why vampires? What kind of drew you to vampires, and is there anything about their lore that's really struck you and inspired you?
I've always been really intrigued by the vampire mythos since I was probably in my early teens, and sneaking my mom's Anne Rice books, and watching Interview with the Vampire and so many other classic vampire movies, and just really intrigued by the Gothic. So my formative text as a human being is the Phantom of the Opera in all of its iterations. And I was just very into the Gothic, especially in my teen years, that has translated into then building a career writing Gothic fiction. And I think the vampires has spoken to me over time for a lot of reasons. They're a really wonderful allegory or just sometimes explicit depiction of queerness. There's all this religious imagery and religious ennui tangled up with the vampire, which I find really delicious and delectable as someone with a background studying religion at the academic level, and also having a personal interest in theology and religion and spirituality. So I think it was natural that I would end up writing a vampire book at some point in time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's so much to it that has inspired you. Continuing from that, though, is there any media in particular that inspired Dowry or just inspired your love? You mentioned Anne Rice and things like that, but is there, in addition to that, any kind of surprising media that people might not expect that's influenced you?
Yes. So there were a couple of really strong influences on A Dowry of Blood, Anne Rice being one of them. I would not have a career if it were not for Anne Rice doing what she did in the way that she did it. I think my vampires are very much in conversation with hers in a lot of different ways. But also I really loved, when I was in my teens, the 2004 B horror movie Van Helsing, which everyone knows I'm a Van Helsing apologist. I talk about it online all the time. It still has one of my favorite Draculas on screen ever. And in Van Helsing, the brides are played by these wonderful actresses who just chew the scenery, and they actually have kind of a lovely inner world in their little Dracula-led family that they have with this vampire lord. And there's a little bit of infighting and eroticism and friendship between the brides, and I was I want to know more of that. I want to be in a vampire polycule, so let's write about that. And then I think in terms of the voice of the book and the way that I use language, I'm really indebted to Catherine Valenti, especially Deathless, which is a phenomenal novel. And then I was also really inspired, when I wrote Dowry, it was in the first year of the pandemic, and I got through it by watching musicals in the evening with my friends. We would watch a new foreign language musical every night for a week, and that was just my serotonin as I was going through it. And we watched Elizabeth Das Musical, which is a German language musical about Empress Elizabeth, and it's kind of told through the lens of the figure of death being in love with her and chasing her and following her through all the ups and downs of her life and the ups and downs of the empire that she's trying to maintain rulership over. And that was just so entrancing to me, and I really wanted to write a story that was Death and the Maiden, and my answer to Death and the Maiden was to do Dracula.
Awesome.
There's a lot here.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll touch on a few of those things.
Oh, good.
Later. But in addition to kind of Elizabeth the musical and movies and things like that, I happen to know that music is a major influence for you as well.
Yes, that's true.
I know that you've mentioned before in your writing process and when you're first conceiving of a story that you tend to envision things like their music video.
Yeah, yeah.
And so music is really just a part of your creative process. So just as a little fun question, is there any particular song or music that influenced Dowry? And as a bonus, do you have any song associations with any of the brides?
Oh, for sure. Like when I'm writing anything, I always have a playlist. Like that's a really important part of the process for me. And I had like a playlist for Dowry that was like there was some songs from musicals, it was some instrumental pieces, it was a lot of like early dark wave goth music, which I love, and then just like some modern songs as well. But I think I'm trying to think of like which ones were her which bride. I definitely associate, it's newer to me. I've only really heard it in the last like 6 months or so, but I think it's beautiful. I really like Mitski's, I think it's Me and My Husband for Constanza. And then there's a whole rich story there, just like under the surface of the song. And then Alexi's was Bite the Hand That Feeds by 9 Inch Nails. My little combative hedonist, my son.
We love him.
We love him. We love Alexi in this house. And then Magdalena was a couple of different ones, but I keep coming back to, if I can pronounce it correctly, Der Schachten werden langer from Elizabeth's musical, which is kind of a song about death trying to seduce the maiden figure, and her battles with like depression and mental illness and like refusing to give in to despair. But it's about how despair can be so seductive when you're in a certain headspace. So I think that would be Magdalena's song.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I still love how like Alexi's associated with the
9 Inch Nails.
I think that's like my favorite little fact. So Dowry of Blood is
Yes.
a Dracula retelling.
That's what it says on the tin, yes.
And you know, as we know, Dracula is kind of this larger than life gothic tale that is woven into any gothic fan's subconscious. I feel like it's just kind of been around, and it is such a powerful story. So how did you go about kind of rewriting it and writing it as a retelling? How did you approach such a larger than life story?
Well, I think for me, I feel so lucky and blessed that I got to write this book, because I got to just cherry pick everything I loved about vampire stories and just like distill it down into a liquor and then make that into a cocktail. Like that's what the experience was like. I got to use the queerness, the eroticism, the religious imagery, the meditations on immortality and what it does to a person psychologically, and then the meditation on what eternal love is, and like how that can be a very scary thing as well as a very exciting and beautiful thing, and like marriage. Like these are all themes that come up in a lot of vampire literature, and so I just took those themes that I loved, and then I built characters that I loved, and I used them to explore those themes. So A Dowry of Blood is like all vibes, no plot. I own up to that.
It's a music video.
It's a music video. I will write a plotty book one day, but this is not that day.
Just vibes.
Just vibes.
Yeah.
And it's all about the characters' relationships and the way that a marriage can, the rise and fall of a relationship, and the way that love can decay over time, but the way that love can also be redemptive. And that's what I was interested in exploring. So my vision of the retelling, and I've said this many times on many panels and in many mediums, is to write towards joy. Like whatever excites you so much it almost scares you, like that is what you should be writing towards. That's just my personal opinion of how I approach writing any book. And so with the retelling, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get everything about the vampire in. I wasn't going to be able to get all the Easter eggs I wanted to in. I wasn't going to be able to redo Dracula in a way that was the way that another Gothic writer might retell Dracula. I could only do what I was interested in and what was exciting to me. So I just decided to turn it up to 11 and go whole ham unapologetically, just the things that I loved. And that's how I just constructed the book, was out of a place of love. And there was struggle as well, and I was not in like the best place mentally when I was writing the book at first, and it really helped me get through a difficult time in my own mental health. But when I look back on the writing process, I do remember most of all that sense of joy and excitement and exploration.
Yeah, and I think all of that really comes through in your prose
Thank you.
and in the story itself. And I think one of the most powerful things about Dowry is that it feels like a very interior story. It's very
For
much
sure.
focused on emotions and character and how you feel and what it feels like to kind of go through time in, as you said, like a decaying relationship,
Yes.
and all the transformations that kind of occur through that. And you know, considering Dowry is now a full-length novel,
Yeah.
and you've used that epistolary method of it being a diary kind of for her and letters and things like that. But with it feeling so interior and close, I know Dowry started as a short story,
It
and it was that very close kind of narrative that really you felt like it was contained initially, and that was the story that needed to be told. And so, like, what was it like expanding that and keeping that same very fragile, close, personal kind of voice that you use in the short story?
I'm just gonna hold this and I'll lean. Phenomenal. So when I first wrote A Dowry of Blood, it was something I wrote in college. Like when I first wrote the short story that inspired A Dowry of Blood, it was something I wrote in college. And interestingly enough, it was just it's almost microfiction. It's 3 very short vignettes, each of the brides telling the story of how Dracula turned them. And it was Constanza, Magdalena, and Alexei. The characterizations are slightly different, but it was the original template for those characters. And I actually had a college professor who looked at the piece, and God bless him, he's really lovely, and I have no notes otherwise, but he was like, you can't do anything with this. Don't listen to your professor's kids. And I was like, okay, I'll sit on it. And then there was this call for a queer Gothic fiction anthology, and I was like, perfect, ding, ding, ding. And I sent it in, and it got accepted, and the editor reached out to me afterwards, and Celine, who was phenomenal, my very first editor who worked with me on Dowry of Blood, back before it got picked up by the team at Orbit, and she said, if you ever want to do something full length, let me know, I'd love to work with you. And I said, I can work with that for sure. And we kind of created A Dowry of Blood together, so it was a very collaborative process. But I also had free reign to kind of do whatever I wanted, and I could get really experimental, which is great. Like, The Dowry of Blood is written in an experimental epistolary format. It is a mixture of first person and second person, kind of. It's very queer, very bisexual, very polyamorous, bloody, violent, a lot of things that aren't right down the middle of what you would expect traditional publishing to like and to be successful doing. But I didn't have the pressure of working in traditional publishing when I was writing it. I could really just write towards joy and towards what excited me. And that's what I did. And Celine was phenomenal and very supportive. And I never expected it to end up where it is now, which I'm very grateful for. But that was kind of the process of approaching it with a collaborator.
Great. Well, we're so happy that that happened.
Yeah.
That collaboration happened. Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking back to, like you mentioned, and I think you mentioned this every time, like you do a rewatch of Van Helsing, but I'm taking it back.
Every time I'm like, I'm gonna watch Van Helsing. I don't know what you're doing with your night.
Yeah. But Van Helsing as a movie was kind of one of the first things that really gave the brides a hint of an interior world and
That's
something
really
kind of
true.
going on between them.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that as being an influence and kind of just what's going on in their heads. And so, you know, I'm just really glad to see that even though it started as something much shorter, that you were able to really dive into that and explore that side and give each of the brides even more of a voice.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So I happen to know as well.
You know a lot of things.
I know a lot. I was there when The Dark Magic was written. So I do know that the original kind of tagline and working title for Dowry was Feast on the Ruin of Empires.
Yes.
and that has now become your playlist title.
Yes.
So that is the playlist for Dowry, but it was originally the working title for it before I gave you Dowry.
Kit titled it. I was like, I don't know what to call it.
So how about Dowry of Blood?
I said, that sounds great.
All right. But I do think that the novel does a wonderful job of kind of chronicling the downfall and struggles of a relationship or four relationships, alongside the kind of destruction and downfall of various empires in Europe at the time and throughout the course of the story. And you've also mentioned before that one of the great horrors of being a vampire and living forever is that things kind of are forever and you outlive things and you watch things fall apart and you watch things decay. And being in a relationship that's so entangled throughout all of that and everything else kind of ends, but that does not. What can you just talk more about your influence in writing those themes and kind of what it was like mirroring those two things in Dowry?
There's a lot here. I think going back to some of the media inspirations, when I was watching Elizabeth S. musical, I was really intrigued by the way there was that this interpersonal drama was being played out against the backdrop of a crumbling empire and an empire at the end of its lifespan. And so one thing I was really interested in exploring with the consorts or the brides in Dowry is how they all have their own different coping mechanisms of dealing with living forever. I really like the idea that we're not supposed to live forever, and it kind of does something to you, like the kind of, you have to find a way to survive surviving in a way. So Constanza has a really strong sense of justice, and she's quite religious. Magdalena, she finds meaning through being involved on the world stage politically, but she also, her mental illness, her struggles with depression and mania get worse with time, and like the episodes kind of get longer and more drawn out because mental illness develops as you age. Sometimes you get surprise mental illness at 25 and you're like, all right, thanks, genetics. And then Alexei deals with being alive forever with hedonism and partying and making friends and just being a charming, golden little songbird, basically. But they're all dealing with a deep internal pain about living forever. And then similarly to what you brought up about relationships that go on forever, I kind of, and I'm going to say this, and I'm very excited to get married. I love the idea of getting married. But I do like exploring the idea of marriage as horror. Like, it's, I'm going somewhere with this. It's forever, and you really hope that the person that you are making forever happen with is going to be the person you believe them to be. And I think a lot of times horror stories that come out of marriages and the way we can write about marriage in a horror context for the Gothic or the speculative audience is, what happens if your beloved is actually the monster and you have decided to spend your life with them and you're stuck with them and you're locked in a Gothic manner? So it's taking this, I think, underlying anxiety that we feel about forever, forever alive, forever in love, forever not aging, things that sound really enticing, but are kind of like a monkey's paw when you think about it. And I wanted to really explore, well, what would it be like if you are a vampire and you live forever and you're in this eternal marriage, but the marriage is crumbling around you? Like, there is no easy out of that. So that's what we did.
The horrors.
The horrors of marriage.
But continuing with that
Yes.
kind of theme, Dowry does deal a lot with darker themes, not just about the decay of a relationship, but domestic abuse within that relationship. And there's a lot of kind of darkness, and you also mentioned like mental illness throughout the novel and things like that. And so what I'm curious about is, what was it like exploring those darker themes like domestic abuse in especially a non-traditional relationship format? So like within the polyculas, the brides and Dracula. Were there any struggles that came about with trying to write things like that?
It was something I wanted to approach really carefully because I wanted to give it a sense of depth and complexity, mean, Dracula is the clear villain here. He is the aggressor, he's the abuser. But I wanted him to have motivations and desires and needs outside of just being the bad guy. And I wanted the brides to all have a really complex interior world and reasons for staying and reasons for wanting to protect each other, even to protect the unnamed vampire that we all know is Dracula in this story. So I did a lot of research, and I wanted to depict intimate partner abuse as thoroughly but as respectfully as I could. So I read a lot of psychological studies of like narcissism and intimate partner abuse. I read Why Does He Do That, which is a really good book about particularly trends of abuse as they manifest in men that are receiving clinical care for being the aggressor in situations, and how those trends manifest in family life. I also read In the Dream House, which is a phenomenal mixed genre, experimental, quasi-autofiction, quasi-fictional portrayal of a queer relationship that has decayed and become abusive, and that the protagonist needs to escape from. And I read In the Dream House, and I was like, well, if the Dream House can go there, I can go there. And I don't think I'm going to be quite as good as In the Dream House, but also if the Dream House can be experimental, then so can I. And I think that the way that I decided to approach dealing with these dark themes does manifest a lot in the structure of the novel, because it's someone that has experienced a lot of terrible things, remembering them and taking back her own agency and power, while also getting really deep into those memories and reliving, getting into the grooves of those emotions and reliving what that felt like in the moment. So she relives the love and the pain and the agony and the ecstasy, as well as being able to say, but I have time and distance now, and I know what was happening, even though at the time I didn't know what was happening. So I think that a lot of how I decided to handle heavier themes comes out in the structure of the novel and the decision to make it epistolary. In the beginning, Constanza says, this is my last love letter to you, though some would call it a confession. So it's part love letter, part breakup note, and part murder confession, which is not a spoiler, it's on the first page. And that was really, really fun to write and really gratifying, because I felt like I was really able to dig into the meat of some heavier issues. And that's also why there's content warnings at the beginning of the book.
Yeah. So in addition to the kind of darkness that is woven within the book, in terms of their relationship, you mentioned always trying to write toward joy.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about the positive aspects and what it was like writing the love between the three brides in Dracula. I almost said four brides, but like what was that like? And because it's not something we typically see, especially in the in Dracula retellings or in the story of Dracula, we don't really get to see how the brides might feel about one another. But that's something that really drove you when writing the book and what you wanted to explore. So can you just talk a little bit more about like the nice things?
Yeah, it was such a pleasure. This was, so now in the works that I am working on and kind of what I'm known for, a lot of my love stories are between 3-4 people, although I do occasionally write monogamous love stories. But at the time it was very new for me. I hadn't written a love story between multiple people before. And it was such a joy because there's more everything. There's more feelings, there's more connections, there's more opportunities for growth and change and love. There's also more opportunities for communication breakdowns and for jealousy and for antagonism. But I really wanted to work through those the way I would work through them in any other story, any other love story, despite the fact they were vampires. I wanted the love story to feel very grounded, very accessible, very lived in. So that the polyamorous love story is not something that feels fantastical, even though it is fun and sexy and they're vampires. Like, I wanted it to feel real. And the way that I tried to do that was, and it technically, writing-wise, it is a demand. The more people you add to a relationship, it gets a lot more complex. Like, your outline just grows exponentially, and there's color coding, and it's very stressful. But I was just excited to be able to do it, and I approached it by trying to give everyone as much screen time with all the possible configurations of the relationship as possible. So one time, couple time, triad time, quartet time, quad time. And I always say if Dowry was 100 pages longer, it would just be me doing character development stuff. It would just be more bride on bride content.
But we love that.
We do. We love to see it.
So when are we getting that? In a newsletter?
I don't know. Stay tuned.
All right. Well, to that degree, I know that the fan response to Dowry has been just incredible. And I mean, on TikTok, social media, just everywhere. And a little bit unexpected, I think.
For sure.
As well.
For sure.
Yeah. But very well deserved.
Thank you.
So with that, has there been anything that has really surprised you with the fan response or anything that you've seen?
I think the fan response itself has been a huge surprise. As I said before, when I was writing Dowry, I was like, if 50 people read this and get something out of it, I will be happy. Like, I was just really in a state where I needed to write the book for my own sanity. It was the story I wanted to tell, and I also, just on a more pragmatic note, I wanted to get out another book. I try to be a book a year person. I haven't been in the last 2 years, but I wanted to get more work out there, and I really wanted to grow my audience, and I wanted to show people what I could do. I was like, I'm doing something new and different, and it felt a little dangerous. It felt a little risky. Like, this is not the most risky book you can read. I can give you some book recs, but for me, it felt really risky at the time. So just to see it catch fire and strike like lightning has been absolutely bonkers. I'm so thrilled, and I'm so eternally grateful to readers, because the reason this book has had the success it has, and the reason that it got picked up by Orbit, we love our team at Orbit, thank you publicity, thank you editorial, thank you interior cover design, is because of word of mouth and because of the response on social media. And so I try to be good and stay out of my tag, and I don't read my reviews, and I don't go into my tag on TikTok and stuff. I learned that earlier on in my career, but it is wild to be scrolling on my own TikTok account and have my book come on my For You page. Like, that is a sweet sensation. So those have been some of my more out-of-body experiences, but it's been really amazing, and I'm just incredibly grateful.
I mean, I know as someone who's just kind of been following along on this journey with you, one of the things that's really been amazing to see is the creativity that has come out of this.
Yes.
I mean, people have, you have candles and tea blends and art and just tattoos. There's been just like such an amazing outpouring of creativity that's come from Dowry, and I think that for me has just been amazing to watch grow, and really just makes today all the more exciting.
Yeah, I'm someone that comes from, I'm not as deeply entrenched in it as I was when I was younger, but I'm someone that does come from fandom. And to me, everyone has a different, every author has different things that they hope for. Whether that is commercial success, critical success, hitting certain lists, making a certain cultural impact. And for me, success feels like people being creative with my work and coming and wanting to play in my sandbox. So every time that there's fan art or fan fiction, I'm just like, that is the highlight of my week, you know? And I love my readers. Everyone thinks they have the best readers, but I really do have some amazing readers. So my heart is full of love.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for moderating and for all these good questions. These are like nice questions.
But I do think that now we wanted to open it up to other questions.
Yes.
Questions not coming from me.
If anyone in the audience has any cues, I'm not sure what time it is, but do we have some time for questions? Oh, beautiful, phenomenal. So I'm here.
Can you tell us anything about the companion novel?
Oh, that is a good question. Marlo asked if I can tell you guys anything about the companion novel. So for those of you that don't know, for those of you watching at home, A Dowry of Blood is a 2-book deal. It is getting a companion novel that'll be coming out in fall of 2023, which is really exciting. We're on a bit of an accelerated schedule, so my book is due on Halloween, and boy, are we writing. I feel like I finally cracked what the book is actually about like 3 days ago, so I'm like speed running it now. But I'm a discovery writer, so that's not unusual for me. Thank you. So it is a companion novel. It's not a direct sequel, although there may or may not be cameos. I can't say yes or no. We love a cameo. It is a whole new setting, a new timeline, and new characters that I'm really excited for you to meet. And I can tell you that it is based on another work of classic literature. I can't say which one, but points if you guess right. And I can't tell you if you guessed right, but you'll find out in a year that you were right, and that'll be a sense of satisfaction. And we're currently in talks about the title. My publisher and I have been going back and forth. I have gone through like 20 or 30 possible titles, and we've gone through a couple from my agent, from my publisher, and we're getting really close. And I'm really excited. It's sexy. It's great. It's some fun. So I'm really hoping that I can share at least a title with the readers and with interested parties sometime soon. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, thank you for talking to us today.
Oh, thank you for coming.
So you mentioned that this writing process for you felt really experimental and risky, and so I was wondering which aspect of it felt the riskiest.
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's tied. Top two would be the non-traditional structure, so writing it in an epistolary style. It has no chapter breaks. There's no chapter breaks. There's just some chunks of the book are very long, some are only a sentence long, separated by pages. Orbit did a phenomenal job, by the way, if you haven't seen the interior. Each section has Gothic typesetting and drop caps, and it's just beautiful. It's like the way the book should have always been read, I think. And then I think the other part that felt really risky is the book is kind of spicy. Again, I'm not Sierra Simone, I'm not Katie Robert, though I would like to be someday. But the book it's erotic, it's sensual, and at the time I had done one YA book, Robber Girl, which has a fade to black scene, and one adult novella that had it has a sex scene in it, but it's very mild, and Dowry is bloody and kinky and multiple people at once, and that to me at the time felt very intimidating. But it's interesting because I kind of unlocked in writing this book, I unlocked the fact that I love writing about love, and I love writing about sex, and I love writing about sensuality, and I love using that as a narrative tool. And now I can't write a book without using those tools. But at the time I was scandalizing myself.
I'm sorry, are you a Scorpio?
I am Scorpio. That's right, Scorpio stellium, baby. Thank you for your question.
Other questions?
Thank you for coming today.
And thank you for coming. It's good to see you.
So I was wondering, what is next for you after the companion novel? What are you feeling?
Oh, this is ASMR. It's delicious. That's a great question. I always love to talk about what I'm working on as much as I'm able to. So the companion novel is under lock and key. I am under contract. I really can't talk about it outside of what Orbit has signed off on, which is that's good because I will just spill all the details and ruin the surprise. So my team knows what they're doing. But there's two things that are either finished or almost finished that I'm really excited about. And then there's a series that is in the works, which we might be able to see sometime soon. So I have a series that I'm working on that is polyamorous magicians in Boston breaking a family curse with the power of love and magic. And it's very contemporary. It feels much more like the Raven Cycle. It feels a lot like Constantine or Supernatural, which is interesting because I've always considered myself a contemporary fantasy writer. I was raised on urban fantasy, and I wrote this like lyrical historical, and now everyone's like, oh, you write historical, and I was like, just this one time. Like, we're gonna see. But then there's a book I'm working on that I'm really excited about that is still in the work in process, but it is it's set in Scotland, and it is a marriage of convenience. The land is angry at us in my ancestral home, and we're all forced proximity trapped together, very kinky, very poly, and very full of like magic and folklore. And it's incredibly gothic, and I'm really excited about that one, and I hope that that is like a next step that I can take in my career with that book, because I feel like very similar to the way that Dowry was everything I was excited about at the time, that fairy book is everything I'm excited about right now. So thank you for letting me gush about my whips.
Any other questions?
Awesome. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you for coming.
I know you said you wrote this like out of a need. Was there like a scene or something that was like haunting you, that like became like this the nucleus of this?
So that's a really good question, because as Kit mentioned, I kind of write things when I get the ideas. They're like music videos. So I have a sense of atmosphere, a little bit of sense of character and tone, and then I usually get like set piece scenes that I work the book around. And so the big set piece scene I had was the murder that opens the book, but also the first sex scene between Dracula, Magdalena, and Constanza, when Constanza is like very jealous but also like quickly becoming obsessed with Magdalena. I was like, I gotta do it. I gotta give the people what they want. That was like present in my mind, and it was like, these are relationship dynamics that I want to explore. The scene where Dracula finds Constanza in the church and basically says, "You're never gonna get away from me." I was thinking that that was a core emotional moment. And then the infamous carriage scene, Alexi's turning scene, was also very present in my mind. Good choices, right?
Anyone else?
I love your jacket.
Oh my gosh, thank you. So thank you for coming and talking to us today. I was just wondering, you talked about other Gothics inspiring. Did writing A Dowry of Blood change any of your perspectives on classic Gothics?
Ooh, no one's ever asked me that before, actually. I think it gave me a renewed appreciation for the genre and made me realize that it's really my home. The Gothic kind of raised me. It was my introduction to horror, and I'm known in some circles as a horror writer. That would never have happened were it not for the Gothic, so I owe a lot to it. I feel like there's so much in classic Gothic that is under the surface. Like, classic Gothic deals heavily with themes of repression and envy and longing and these emotions that are just like under the surface trying to get out, like secrets, family secrets, the sins of the father, like all of these things that are threatening to burst through to the surface. And I wanted to take a lot of those things that I loved about Gothics that were kind of in between the lines, like, and intentionally so, like that is often what the author is going for with those, or there might be issues of censorship as well, especially in cases of like queerness or sexuality, or just not being able to write in a certain time that it wouldn't have been acceptable. I wanted to take everything that was under the surface and make it really viscerally embodied and manifest. So I found myself returning to other works of Gothic literature and classic Gothic movies and saying, yes, but what if it didn't fade to black? And yes, but what if we actually had a conversation about envy or desire or hatred or pain? And what if we, actually talked about abuse as abuse? Which is a decision. Like, I love classical Gothic literature for exactly what it does. This is not to say that I came and fixed the genre by doing that. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that it was something that felt a little bit different to me, and that's what kept me really engaged when I was writing it.
questions?
I have one.
You have
I
one.
do.
Okay.
Is there anything that you wish you had included in Dowry that you would add in now that you hadn't at the time?
Ooh, wow. I think if I had, so the last scene that got added in editing, was the scene between Dracula and Alexei when Dracula figures out that Alexei has been stealing. It's a very short scene, and Dracula basically he calls Alexei like a little rabbit, and he's like, I would hunt you down if you left. And he's like making it sound like a pet name, but it's a very scary thing to tell somebody. And I just realized that we needed more scenes with Alexei and Dracula. I don't think the boys get enough time together. If I went back and I did it again, I would probably do a couple more Alexei Dracula scenes. I'm very happy with the book as it is, but no author is ever totally done fiddling with the story. Like, I have to just not look at it and I will pretend like I'm done, you know? So I think some of that would have been a nice balance in the relationship, and maybe even a little bit more with Constanza and Magdalena, because that has been really the relationship that a lot of readers have just latched onto and has really been celebrated and brought to the forefront. And I think that I could have done, again, if I had 200 more pages, I could have just done all this character work, but I truly believe Dowry is the size it needs to be. I wouldn't, if I could go back and do it all again, I probably wouldn't make it any much more longer. I love a short book. Everyone knows this about me. Some books are too long. That's my hot take. Some books are too long.
Dowry is perfect.
Thank you so much. She's a short queen.
We love it.
Any final questions? I have no idea what time it is, but yeah.
It's up to you at this point.
Okay, phenomenal. Is there anything else anyone would like to ask before we break in for, I believe signing is next?
Yes.
Thrilling. Well, thank you guys so much for coming.
Yeah,
This has
thank
been
you,
wonderful.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to Kit for moderating. Thank you so much to the staff at Booksmith, everyone who was involved in making this happen, to my publicity team that's not here. I just wanted to say an extra special thank you too, because when Dowry first came out, it was an indie release in the middle of the pandemic, and I was not able to do an in-person event. If you can't tell, I love doing in-person events. And it's just been really special for me to be able to celebrate the re-release of this book with people who I care about and who came a long way to see me, and new faces that I now get to meet, and that's just a really lovely thing. So thank you so much for coming. You're the real MVPs.